So our non-biblical reading this morning comes from a book called The Racine by Wendy Wright. It says, Easter is not merely an event of long ago. It is not only the celebration of divine desire to be at one with humankind. It is not only the renewal of the cosmos, nor is it simply our kindled hope for what is promised us. Easter is also realized when we are most fully alive and aware of all that is. A former bishop of Romania has been quoted as saying, if we only knew the truth of it, we would know that each day is Easter.
Reading from John's Gospel. Early in the morning, on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary of Magdala came to the tomb. She saw that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. So she ran off to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and told them, "The rabbi has been taken from the tomb. We don't know where they have put Jesus." At that, Peter and the other disciples started out toward the tomb. They were running side by side, but then the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He didn't enter, but bent down to peer in and saw the linen wrappings lying on the ground. Then Simon Peter arrived and entered the tomb. He observed the linen wrappings on the ground and saw the piece of cloth that had covered Jesus' head lying not with the wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the disciple who had arrived first at the tomb went in. He saw and believed. As yet, they didn't understand the scripture that Jesus was to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to their homes. Meanwhile, Mary stood weeping beside the tomb. Even as she wept, she stooped to peer inside, and there she saw two angels in dazzling robes. One was seated at the head, and the other at the foot of the place where Jesus' body had lain. They asked her, "Why are you weeping?" She answered them, "Because they have taken away my rabbi, and I don't know where they have put the body." No sooner had she said this than she turned around and caught sight of Jesus standing there. But she didn't know it was Jesus. He asked her, "Why are you weeping? For whom are you looking?" She supposed it was the gardener, so she said, "Please, if you're the one who carried Jesus away, tell me where you've laid the body, and I will take it away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned to him and said, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Then Jesus said, "Don't hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to Abba God. Rather, go to the sisters and brothers and tell them, I'm ascending to my Abba and to your Abba, my God and your God." Mary of Magdala went to the disciples. "I have seen the teacher," she announced. Then she reported what the Savior had said to her.
Would you pray with me? Holy One, as we breathe in the refreshment that is offered us at Easter, let the light fill the dark places within us. May the joy fill the sad spaces. May the hope fill our despair and our exhaustion. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be filled with your light and your love. Amen. Easter is a festival day. It's a celebration. Now, the Christian community in Tanzania has this really amazing ritual that, and I don't know if any of us could ever do it, frankly, but they have an Easter vigil. I think I've only done an Easter vigil once. It's sort of like that whole Christmas Eve thing where you stay up until midnight. Well, Easter vigil is you stay up until midnight Saturday to sort of ring in Easter as it comes in at midnight. But then they dance until dawn. That's their celebration, to bring in the newness and the renewal, the new life, the freshness, in that sheer joy. When at that moment you recognize that, God isn't finished yet. And you keep dancing. So today, each one of us is offered resurrection. Jesus had his, but now it's about us. Because you see, Easter isn't just about what happened in the past or what's going to happen in the future. Easter is about right now and where we are in our lives right now, what we need in our lives right now, and how we approach each moment of life. And resurrection today, the theme, gives us the opportunity to remember that each moment can be Easter. Each moment can be filled with hope and new possibilities and new potentials if we're willing to look at that and see that and take it in. We all know that we can rise from the ashes of whatever happens in our life. How do we know that? Because we've all been there and done that. We have all at some point been a phoenix rising from the ashes of something that felt like it was a lethal blow. We've made it through. And so we know that it can happen. The challenge of Easter and resurrection is not just in going on after something tough has happened. The challenge is coming through it and being changed. Coming through it and being different, being transformed. Because if you go through something rough, whatever it happens to be, and you don't learn and you don't grow and you just come through and you go back to life as it was, then, well, that's not really resurrection, is it? That's not really new life. It's kind of old life all over again. And if whatever brought you down was a mistake of your own, well, you're just going to make that same mistake all over again. Because the opportunity in those difficult times is change and growth and learning. That's the challenge and the opportunity of Easter for each and every one of us. Like Wendy Wright said in the reading that I shared with you, said Easter is about being fully alive and aware of all that is. It's about coming to a place in our life where we're present here in this moment and recognize just how amazing this moment is. So Anthony DeMello tells a story about aliveness. You see, once upon a time, in a marketplace, there was a master who was there and he was teaching, and many people were gathered to hear the master. And some of them were there because they were his disciples and they were always there and listening and trying to understand, although often they really didn't get it until much later. And some were there because they were curious and they wanted to hear what he had to say. Some were there because they were dragged along by their friends. Some were there because they wanted to trip up the master, because they had a different master. But they all gathered around to listen that day, and for whatever reason, the questions on that day centered around death and the grave, and was there really life after death? And they kept asking the master these questions. But he only responded one way. His only response was laughter. He'd chuckle at him sometimes really softly, but sometimes he'd guffaw and he'd laugh. Sometimes he just laughed with the pleasure of it all. But these poor people kept pushing him and wanting to know the answers about death and life after death, and his only response was to laugh, and they were getting increasingly infuriated and frustrated and felt insulted and angry. But his only response during all of that was to laugh. And then finally, he just got up and walked away. Well, that night, his disciples sat with him, and they really were still in not a good place because of what had happened that morning. And they pushed him, and they said, let's talk about whatever that was this morning. We don't get it. Why did you just laugh? Why can't you just answer? Just tell us. Just give us the answer. Is there life after death or not? Yes or no? And the master laughed again. And he put on sort of this air of mock seriousness, and he said, have you ever noticed who it is who keeps asking whether there's life after death? He said, it seems like it's always the people who are having trouble with this life. That they're the ones who are looking for another life that has nothing to do with this one. Well, this did not ease the disciples' anxiety at all. And so they kept asking him and pushing him, and finally he looked at them and he said, what I want to know is not whether there is life after death, but whether there is life before death. Are any of you really alive? You see, Jesus didn't preach about death. That wasn't like the main thrust of his message. He preached about life and how to live. And that's what we're reminded about today and asked about. Are any of us really alive? You know, Paula D'Arcy is a fairly well-known spiritual writer. She was in a car accident with her husband and her 22-month-old daughter, both of whom died. She was pregnant at the time with their second child, and she and the child within her both survived. But she came out of that understandably angry and overwhelmed with grief. And she spent her days just really, really hurting and overwhelmed, and it became so much that she just started shutting down and shutting people out. She didn't answer the phone, she didn't go to the door. Gratefully, she had friends who weren't going to let her go that easily, and they hung with her and they let her know that they were there for her. But it still wasn't easy. You know, day after day she would nurse her daughter, she would make cookies, she would clean the house, and then at night she would just cry out, what is the meaning of all of this? What is the meaning of my life? And then one day she read an obscure quote that said, we hear the rain, but we don't hear the snow. And for whatever reason, that quote really struck her. And it sort of flipped a switch, and she suddenly decided that she wanted to live her life with enough passion and intensity and awareness so that she would hear the sound of snow falling. Finally, there was a crack in the darkness. Finally, she was no longer living every single second in anger and in grief, and she was allowing a little bit of light and hope and openness in her heart again. In her book that I read, she quoted Anne Wilson Schaaf, who said that choosing not to die is not the same as choosing to live. Did you catch that? Choosing not to die is not the same as choosing to live. And she said she didn't want to live half awake, half asleep anymore. She wanted to live fully alive. So that's my question for you today, is what does it mean to live fully alive? What does that look like? Don't all talk at once. What does it look like? Do we not know? Is that why we're quiet? What does it look like to live fully alive?
To be thankful.
To be thankful. To have an attitude of gratitude about us as we go through our days. To take chances. To be willing to risk.
Appreciate what's in front of you or around you, growth and sunrise, sunset, colors.
To appreciate everything that's around you and to see the beauty every day, even in the middle of winter around here when it's gray and icky out, to be able to see the beauty that's out there. What else?
To open your heart to other people.
To open your heart to other people. Yeah, you can't be fully alive if you're like she was, all closed up and answering the phone and not going out and not allowing herself to be touched or touch others. What else? What does it mean to be fully alive?
To love and be loved.
To love and be loved. James.
Live life to the fullest.
To live life to the fullest. Absolutely. Love every single second, right? Go all out, whether it's playing soccer or it's reading a book or it's loving your mom and dad. Everything to its fullest. Let's see if you got everything on my list.
Find the beauty in the struggle.
My dad says to find the beauty in the struggle. Absolutely. How about to not sweat the small stuff? How many of us get caught up on the stupid minutia of life and the little things that irritate us? Not worth it. Not worth it. Be fully alive and aware of all that is. That's the calling of Easter. And everything that you just said and more. To be curious, to feel deeply, to laugh, to have joy, to have faith, to surround yourself with people who are uplifting and to be uplifting for others, to reach out a helping hand. All of it is to be fully alive and not get so caught up in the worry and the struggle and the anger and the bitterness. There's no point. It really isn't. Paula Darcy went on to live differently because she was transformed. Again, that resurrection is a transformation, and she was transformed, resurrected, and she wrote books, and she's a sought-after speaker, and she shares the resurrection that came through her struggle, and that's become a blessing to others. So, about 6 weeks ago, Sue Andrew came to me with a song called You Say, that's done by the piano guys, which is really a piano and a cello, so it's very confusing that they're called the piano guys. But I went and I listened to the song on YouTube, and the two of them are going to play it for communion in just a little bit, so pay close attention when you're sharing communion. The cellist, Stephen Nelson, posted really a testimonial, if you will, on their YouTube official version of the song. And he shared that when they filmed the song, that he had just been so amazingly moved they filmed this, part of the way they filmed the song is on an unfinished building. So you've seen those buildings out there where they've got the floors that are set, but there are no walls. And so there are some shots of them in this building where they're playing. One's in a middle level, and the light, there are city lights around them, and it's dark, and you see just, him sitting in the middle of this empty floor playing. And another is they're on the top level, and you can see the countryside, and they're up there, and they're in the sunshine, and they're playing this music. And he said when they filmed it, it played it over and over and over again to film it. He said he had one of those moments that was just a really, really profound moment. You've had them, right? Where something occurs to you that hasn't occurred to you before. It feels like it's coming from outside of you because it feels profound and like a new perspective and something you should really pay attention to. But typically he's the kind of person who's pretty hard on himself, has some pretty high expectations, sounds like a perfectionist to me when he was describing things. He said if you could be incarcerated for self-abuse, he would be prisoner of the month. That was his comment. So that's the place he was coming from. And the impression he got when he was playing was that he needed to let go of some of that perfectionism. He had the sense playing on that unfinished building that he spent too much of his life focused on the unfinished floors of his life, on the unfinished pieces of the building, on the mess that's on the first floor, and the things that weren't meeting up to his expectations. I should really read it because he makes it sound a whole lot better than I'm making it sound right now. He said, I began to think that maybe I spent too much of my life in the bottom floors of my life's construction project, that I fuss over the mess of my job site. I fret over the lack of finishes, the ugly marred subflooring, or the exposed metal framing. I berate myself for being way behind in the building process. And so at that moment, he understood that he needed to let go of some of that and live. To live fully and abundantly and not, again, sweat the small stuff. He said he realized he needed to ascend to the higher levels and be grateful for what he had, not for what was unfinished. To ascend to a place where he could see the sunset and know that tomorrow would be another day. And that he could keep building one day at a time. And so that's what Easter calls us to. To not get caught up on the unfinished stuff in our lives because it's always going to be there. But to be grateful of what we have and who we are and what we've accomplished and where we are in life. To look around and see the beauty and the beautiful people who surround us and the ways that we're held up and comforted and loved, to see this community and the joy that exists here. All of that's Easter. That we're that unfinished building and God isn't finished with us yet. And that's okay. In fact, that's really good because who wants to be completely finished? So resurrection is for us now, in every moment, to reclaim it, to live fully, being fully alive and fully aware of all that is. Grab it. It's yours. Amen.